All right, let's get right into it. We're diving deep into composting today, specifically setting up your own system
Awesome.
and looking at the resources you've gathered. Seems like you're really interested in like location, the different types of bins,
Yeah.
and whether to DIY or buy.
Right.
Right.
Definitely. Those are some great starting points. There are a ton of options out there.
Oh yeah, for sure. It can be kind of overwhelming, honestly.
It definitely can be.
But we're here to make it a little less scary.
Absolutely. We'll break it all down and make it easy to understand.
So first things first, location.
Yeah? Where?
I mean, it can't be that hard to pick a spot, right? Just stick it somewhere out of the way.
Haha. Well, not exactly. It might seem pretty simple at first, but trust me, putting a little thought into it up front
Okay.
can save you a ton of headaches later on.
Okay. I'm listening.
Think about it. You're going to be hauling those kitchen scraps out there pretty regularly.
Yeah, the kitchen scraps commute.
Exactly. So you're not going to want to be trekking through like snow drifts in the middle of winter just to toss out a banana peel.
Oh, tell me about it. I used to have my compost bin way at the back of the yard.
Uh-oh.
And let me tell you, running out there in the pouring rain was not fun.
Nope, not ideal. So definitely accessibility is key. Easy access from your house no matter what the weather's doing. And ideally, somewhere close to a water source too, you know?
Oh, right. So you can keep the moisture levels balanced.
Exactly. But don't make the mistake of putting it under a tree, even though it seems like a good idea.
Oh, yeah. Why not? Seems like it'd be nice and shady.
You'd think so, but tree roots can be super invasive.
Oh, right.
And they'll start competing with your compost for nutrients or even damage the bin itself.
Okay, so no trees. What else should we avoid? Is there like a Goldilocks zone for compost bins?
Haha, kind of. You
Nah.
definitely want a well-drained area. Level ground if possible. And you're aiming for that sweet spot. Right. Not too much sun, not too much shade. A bit of both is perfect.
Got it. Like dappled sunlight.
Exactly. That'll help keep the temperature just right for those little decomposers to do their thing.
Makes sense. Oh, and we can't forget the neighbors. Don't want to be known as that house with the smelly compost.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the neighbor factor is definitely something to consider. Although, to be fair, a well-maintained compost pile shouldn't really have a strong odor.
That's good to know.
But, it's still good to be mindful. Maybe place it a bit further from the property line or choose a bin with good odor control, just in case.
Good tips. So we've got our perfect location, easy access, good drainage, neighbor approved. What's next?
Now for the fun part. Let's talk bins. You've got so many options. Hot bins, 3-bin systems, tumblers, trench composting, bokashi, vermicomposting.
Whoa, that's a lot of choices. It's like a whole composting buffet.
It is. But don't worry, we'll break it all down.
Okay, good. Where do we even start? What are the pros and cons of each one?
Good question. Let's start with the hot bins. Those are like the speed demons of the composting world.
Ooh, speed demons. Like the sound of that. Tell me more.
All right, so hot bins are specially designed to hold in heat, which speeds up the whole decomposition process.
So you get compost faster.
Exactly. But there's a trade-off. They do require a bit more attention. You need to get that mix of materials just right, the right balance of greens and browns.
Right.
And you got to keep an eye on the temperature, make sure it's staying in that sweet spot.
So hot bins are for the serious composters, the ones who are really dedicated to the craft.
Yeah, you could say that. If you're looking for efficiency and you're willing to put in a little extra effort, hot bins are the way to go.
Cool. So what about for those of us who, maybe aren't quite as intense about our composting?
Well, there are definitely more laid-back options. Tumblers, for example, are known for being super easy to use.
Tumblers, like the ones that spin.
Yep, exactly. You just give the drum a turn every so often to aerate the compost. It helps speed up the process and keeps things from getting too messy.
Less mess is always a good thing.
Right, but they do tend to have a limited capacity, so they might not be the best choice if you have a lot of yard waste to compost.
Okay, so tumblers are good for, like, smaller batches.
Pretty much. If you're looking for something low maintenance and you don't generate a ton of compostable material, tumblers are a great option.
Got it. Now, what about something a little more natural? Like just letting nature do its thing.
Ah, I see you're interested in trench composting.
Trench composting?
Yeah, it's as simple as it sounds. You dig a trench, bury your organic waste, and let nature take over.
Wow, so it's like the ultimate low-effort method.
Pretty much, but you do need the space to be digging trenches in your yard.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you have to be okay with the idea of burying your food scraps. Not everyone's comfortable with that.
Right. So trench composting is for the folks with a bit of land and a love for simplicity. What about this bokashi thing I keep seeing? What's that all about?
Ah, bokashi. Now that is a cool method. It actually uses a special bran that's been inoculated with beneficial microorganisms
Okay.
to ferment your food waste. And it's awesome because you can compost things that you normally couldn't in other systems, like meat and dairy.
Wait, really? Meat and dairy?
Yep. And the best part is, it's usually done indoors. You just need a special bokashi bucket.
Indoor composting. That's perfect for people who don't have a lot of outdoor space.
Exactly. But keep in mind, bokashi composting actually involves 2 stages. So after the initial fermentation process, you still need to finish composting the material in a traditional compost pile or bin.
Okay, so it's kind of like a hybrid method.
Exactly. Now, last but not least, we've got vermicomposting. That's the one with the worms.
Yeah, the worms, I have to admit, I'm a little intimidated by that one, like all those worms wriggling around.
I totally get it. Worms aren't everyone's cup of tea. But trust me, these little guys are amazing composters.
Okay, you've piqued my interest. Tell me more about this worm-powered magic.
All right, so with vermicomposting, you basically have a bin filled with red wiggler worms.
Red wigglers.
Yeah, they're a specific type of worm that's really good at breaking down organic matter, and they just munch away on your food scraps, turning them into these nutrient-rich castings.
Castings. Like worm poop?
Pretty much, but don't let that gross you out. Worm castings are like black gold for your garden. They're packed with nutrients that your plants will love.
Interesting. So how does vermicomposting actually work? Like, do you just throw your scraps in with the worms?
It's a little more involved than that. You need to set up a proper worm bin, which is basically a layered system with bedding, food scraps, and the worms themselves.
Okay, so it's like a little worm apartment complex.
Exactly. And the great thing about vermicomposting is that it's odorless, so you can actually do it indoors.
Wait, really? Worms indoors?
Yep. No smelly compost piles taking over your yard. You can have a thriving worm ecosystem right in your kitchen or basement.
Wow. You're really changing my perspective on composting. So we've got all these different types of bins, but there's one more big decision to make, to DIY or to buy.
The classic dilemma.
Yeah.
And a perfect segue into our next segment. It really is a tough choice. DIY or buy. Kind of like making, right? Homemade versus store-bought.
Totally. But in all seriousness, what are the pros and cons here? Like, why would someone choose to build their own bin versus just buying one?
Well, first off, DIY composting bins are definitely easier on the wallet.
That makes sense.
You can use recycled materials like old pallets or even an old trash can.
Oh, cool.
And you get to customize it, make it the perfect size and design for your needs. Plus, there's something really satisfying about building something yourself.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That feeling of accomplishment.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing DIY isn't all sunshine and roses, is it?
Uh-huh. You got that right. It does take some time and effort. And, you need at least a little bit of construction know-how.
Yeah, I can see that.
You got to make sure you've got good aeration and that it's easy to get in there and turn the compost. Otherwise, things can get a bit messy.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Like, what if you build a bin that doesn't work properly?
Exactly. It could end up attracting pests or not decomposing properly or just becoming a big smelly mess.
Definitely not the goal.
Yeah.
So that's where those store-bought bins come in, right?
Exactly. Purchased bins are usually made of really durable materials, and they're designed to have good airflow, prevent those pest problems we were talking about. And a lot of them come with cool features like easy turn mechanisms or even built-in compost tea collectors.
Ooh, fancy. So it sounds like purchased bins are definitely more convenient, but I bet they cost more too, right?
Yeah, they usually do come with a higher price tag than DIY options, but you are paying for that convenience and durability and the peace of mind of knowing it's going to work properly.
So it's a trade-off. Affordability and customization versus convenience and a proven design. How do you decide which way to go? What are the main things to think about?
Well, the first thing is space. How much room do you actually have for a compost bin?
Right.
Take some measurements and think about the shape that would fit best in your space. And then consider how much compostable material you're actually generating,
Yeah, that makes sense.
A small household will have very different needs than a big family or someone with a huge garden.
Definitely. And we can't forget about the budget. Composting is supposed to save money, not break the bank.
Absolutely. Stay within your means. And remember, there are plenty of affordable options out there.
True. And one last thing, I guess, is be honest with yourself about your DIY skills.
Uh-huh. Yeah. If you're not super handy with tools, it might be better to go with a purchased bin. Save yourself the frustration.
So it all comes down to space, volume, budget, and skills. DIY or purchased, the important thing is to choose what works for you and helps you reach those composting goals.
You couldn't have said it better myself. Once you've figured out your location and your bin situation, you're well on your way to becoming a composting pro.
I'm feeling pretty confident, ready to turn those kitchen scraps into gardening gold. Thanks for walking me through all of this setup stuff.
Of course. Happy to help.
Now, I think it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of actually composting. Like, what are the different methods?
All right, let's do it. Let's explore those options and figure out which composting method will be your perfect match.
All right, so we've got our location sorted. We've picked out our composting bin. Now it's time to get down to business. How do we actually DO this composting thing? Like, what are the different methods we can choose from?
Okay, great question. There are actually quite a few different paths you can take on your composting journey, and each one has its own, pros and cons, quirks and benefits.
Okay, lay it on me. What are our options?
So you've got your classic static pile composting, which is kind of like the OG method.
Okay.
And then there's the tumbler method, which we touched on a bit earlier. That's the one with the rotating drum.
Right.
And of course, there's the wonderful world of vermicomposting with all those hardworking worms. And then you've got some other interesting methods, like the Berkeley method, which is all about speed and efficiency.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Okay, let's break these down one by one. Let's start with the classic, the OG, the static pile composting. How does that work?
It's pretty straightforward, really. You basically just create a pile of organic matter, your kitchen scraps, yard waste, all that good stuff, and let nature do its thing.
Sounds simple enough, so you just make a pile and walk away.
Well, not quite. It's a little more hands-on than that. You do need to turn the pile regularly to make sure it's getting enough air, and keep those microbes happy.
Right, aeration. That's important for decomposition. So static pile composting is good for people who have a bit more space, right? Like a backyard or something.
Definitely. It's great for larger volumes of compostable material. But it does require some patience. It can take a few months, even up to a year, to get finished compost.
Okay, so it's like the slow and steady tortoise of the composting world. What about the tumbler method? Is that faster?
Tumbler composting is definitely faster. It's more like the hare, you could say. That enclosed rotating drum makes it super easy to mix and aerate the compost.
So speeds up the process.
Exactly. It can significantly reduce the composting time, sometimes getting you finished compost in just a few weeks.
Wow, that's impressive. Okay, and what about vermicomposting? I'm still a little on the fence about those worms, but you're making it sound pretty appealing.
Vermicomposting is definitely a unique method, and those red wigglers are amazing little composters. They're like tiny eating machines, and they turn your food waste into this incredible nutrient-rich material called worm castings.
Worm castings, huh? So how long does it take to get those castings?
With vermicomposting, you can usually start harvesting worm castings within a few months. So it's definitely a quicker method than traditional composting, but not quite as fast as tumbler composting.
Got it. And you mentioned the Berkeley method. What makes that one so special?
The Berkeley method is all about speed. It's a hot composting method, like using a hot bin, but it involves a specific mix of materials and really frequent turning to maintain those high temperatures.
Okay, so it's kind of like hot composting on steroids.
Exactly. And because of that intense heat and frequent turning, the decomposition happens super fast. You can actually have usable compost in as little as 18 days.
18 days? That's incredible. I'm guessing it's pretty labor intensive though, right? All that turning?
It is definitely more hands-on than other methods. If you're going for the Berkeley method, you got to be committed to turning that compost pile several times a day.
Wow, okay. So it's like choosing your own composting adventure. But no matter which method we choose, there must be some basic composting principles that apply across the board, right?
Absolutely. There are a few universal truths when it comes to composting.
Like what?
Well, moisture is super important. You want your compost to be damp, like a wrung-out sponge, but not soaking wet.
Okay, got it.
And you also need to make sure it's getting enough air, which is why turning the pile is so crucial.
Right. Aeration, moisture, what else?
And then there's a balance of greens and browns, which we've mentioned a few times.
Oh, yeah. The legendary greens and browns. Can you remind me what those are again?
Sure. Greens are things like kitchen scraps, grass clippings, fresh manure. They're high in nitrogen.
Okay.
And browns are things like dry leaves, shredded paper, cardboard. They're high in carbon.
Got it. So you need both for a healthy compost pile.
Exactly. Aim for a good mix of both. A general rule of thumb is about 2 parts browns to 1 part greens.
It's like a composting recipe. Instead of flour and sugar, we've got banana peels and cardboard. Speaking of recipes, what happens if things go wrong? Like, what are some common composting problems and how do we fix them?
Ah, yes, the troubleshooting. Even the most experienced composters run into issues sometimes.
I'm sure I will. So what should I watch out for?
Well, one of the most common problems is excess moisture. If your compost pile gets too wet, it can start to smell and the decomposition process will slow down.
Yeah. Nobody wants a stinky compost pile. So how do you fix that?
Adding more browns can help soak up that excess moisture. Things like dry leaves, shredded paper, or even sawdust can work wonders. And make sure you're turning the pile regularly to get some air in there.
Okay, good to know. What if the opposite happens and my compost is too dry?
That's a problem too. Those microbes need moisture to do their work. So if your pile is too dry, give it a light sprinkle of water. But don't overdo it. You don't want to drown your compost.
So it's like the Goldilocks of composting. Not too wet, not too dry, but just right. What other composting gremlins should I be on the lookout for?
Pests can be a nuisance, especially if you're composting food scraps. You know, raccoons, rats, even flies, they're all attracted to those yummy smells coming from your compost pile.
Oh no. How do we keep those critters out?
A good compost bin with a secure lid is your best defense, especially if you live in an urban area.
It's okay, it makes sense.
And try burying your food scraps deep in the pile and covering them with a layer of browns. That'll help mask the smell a bit.
Good tips. Now, what about slow decomposition? What if my compost just seems to be taking forever?
Patience is key when it comes to composting. But if it seems like things are moving exceptionally slow, there might be an imbalance in your pile.
Like what?
Well, it could be that you have too many greens and not enough browns, or maybe it's not getting enough moisture or air. Try turning the pile more often and see if that helps speed things up.
Okay, so it's like a composting detective game. You have to figure out what's going on and make adjustments.
Exactly. Now, how do you know when your compost is finally ready? How do you know when it's finished and ready to use?
Yeah, that's a good question. How do you know when it's done?
Well, finished compost is beautiful stuff. It'll be dark and crumbly, and it'll have a rich, earthy smell. You shouldn't be able to recognize any of the original materials anymore. It'll all be broken down into this lovely, uniform compost.
Okay, so it's like a total transformation. It goes from kitchen scraps to this amazing soil amendment. So once it's ready, how do you actually use it?
You can just scoop it out of the bin, or you can sift it to remove any larger pieces that haven't fully broken down.
Okay.
And then you can spread it on your garden beds, mix it with potting soil, use it as mulch around your plants. The possibilities are endless.
It's like black gold for your garden. From kitchen scraps to garden gold, it's amazing. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. I'm feeling really inspired and ready to start my composting journey. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners out there who are eager to get started?
My biggest piece of advice is to just dive in and experiment. Composting is all about trial and error, finding what works best for you and your lifestyle. There's no one right way to do it.
That's so true. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Composting is very forgiving. Even if you mess up a few times, you're still doing something good for the planet.
Exactly. Every little bit helps. So whether you're composting on a balcony or in a backyard, you're making a difference.
Awesome. I love that. Well, I think that about wraps it up for today. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of composting. Until next time, happy composting, everyone.
Happy composting.